Hey everyone, I'm really excited to talk about recalibrating with you today because recalibrating means no matter what trajectory you're on, you have a chance to set a new one in partnership with God. And today we're going to be talking about limits, especially in this COVID season. And that takes us back to the first story of the Bible, where Adam and Eve had an amazing life in harmony with each other and nature and God, but they gave into the one limit God gave them. They struggled and they wrestled with it and they gave into it. And their story has been our story, the story of humanity, that we struggle with the limits we have. And so honestly, as we grow up, we spend our whole life trying to accept that we have limits and that God is limitless. In this COVID season, we've come face to face with those limits, some that we have broken, limits we had set of what it meant to be healthy, we've gone way over, and other limits that have broken us, where we've experienced loss and grief because we're human. And we can't rescue everybody, we can't save in every situation, and we're not in control. And so I want to give you some practical tips surrounding this idea of limits today, and I hope that they are helpful in you and helpful to recalibrate and get on the path that God would have for you. And so first I want to talk about limits that we have broken, because honestly in COVID season we've all broken some of the limits we had set before. We have ate too much, we have watched too much, maybe online, we have spent too much. With the disintegration of kind of a dichotomy of work and home, we have worked too much. Often we have just too much. That's it, we have too much. And so I want to give some practical tips to help you kind of navigate your way back to a healthy way of having limits. And one of these is just to reflect. And so I'm going to give you some questions to think through. What healthy limits have I crossed through this year? You know, did I financially spend beyond my means, especially if my income changed over the course of the COVID year? Did I relationally cross limits as I stayed in close quarters for a prolonged period of time with those people you call your family? Did I morally cross limits because I thought in this season I wouldn't get caught or no one would know? And did I cross limits with my work-life balance that kept me from being present or being healthy, or kept my family from being healthy? Reflecting is so important. And the second thing I want to encourage you to do is to make a schedule every week to do what you want to do. And I know that sounds awesome, and it's so awesome. I made it my phrase for this year to do what I want to do, because here's what I found out, and it may be similar to you, is that often year after year I'd get to the end and I didn't actually do or become who I wanted to be. And so I found I've got to get in front of this in each week's schedule in partnership with God. God, what are the things you want me to do? And what do I need to do? What discipline, so I can start becoming who you want me to be. And whether your schedule is really, really busy, or maybe in the season has a lot of flexibility, wherever, it's important to schedule. I remember in the early 90s, my family bought like a light pickup truck, and immediately we threw sandbags in the back to create some weight, because we found if we didn't, it would start to drift. And I learned in college, as my mentors would tell me, that men are a lot like trucks. They drive straighter with a heavy load. And so don't discount this tip, even if your load is lighter right now, because we all know if we don't make our schedule, it will fill up with other things. So do what God would have for you. Do what is healthy and what is best. Now, ultimately, that's what this is all about, is becoming who God wants you to be. And so I also want to talk about our other kind of limits, the limits that have broken us as we deal with grief and sorrow and disappointment this year. And the first tip I'd give you is to acknowledge it. It's so easy and maybe natural for us to discount it, to say, oh, this person has it worse, or that family dealt with that, or this country is going through that. But on the spectrum, sorrow is sorrow, disappointment is disappointment. And if you have it, you have it. And so just because someone else has a different degree of it doesn't discount what goes on in your life. Because when we discount it, then we don't acknowledge it and we don't deal with it. And the real problem is not grief. Grief is a natural part of life, and so is sorrow. The problem is unresolved grief, is when we bury it and then later it leaks out. You know, I've shared that my dad experienced cancer this past year, and that's a loss. Not being able to go see him, to know what it was like for him, to be there for him, that's something that if I don't deal with will leak out. And so I want to encourage you journal, think through, what have I lost in this past year? Make a coffee date with a friend to talk through last year and what you have lost, but take time to do that. And the second thing I want to encourage you to do, and this is a practice, to practice trusting that God understands. The shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept. And it's the shortest, but the most powerful, I think. Because not only did Jesus weep because he had friends that were mourning the death of his friend, but in that moment, he not only wept, but he knew. He knew that Lazarus would rise again, that he would be okay. But because I watched Jesus weep, it tells me not only did he know what was going on intellectually, but he entered into that sadness and that grief with his friends. And because Jesus is like that, that means that's what God is like. That's the kind of God that we have that enters into our sorrow. And so you can intellectually know that God understands the facts of what happened in your life without believing he is willing to come and be with you in that moment, to sit with you and have empathy through those messy seasons you go through. That's the kind of God we serve. And so you have to practice trusting that. We all have a default that says, no one gets me, no one really understands. And sometimes we take that into our faith with God, the one who really does understand. And so I hope these tips have been helpful. Now, they're not magical. These practical tips you have to practice so that they can help you recalibrate. And I want to end with a verse out of Psalm 90 that says this in verse 12, God, teach us to number our days, that we may have a heart of wisdom. Teach us to understand our limits so that we can live wisely. And that is my prayer for you, church.